Hello everyone, my name is Bavaria Pendragon, we are the Whispers, and today we're going to go over the Chef Survival Reveal for Seekers of the Storm. This dropped yesterday. I was not planning on making videos for each of these, but I saw this, I was at work today. During one of my 15 minutes breaks, I saw this, and I had some thoughts, and so I just made a community post. I got that right here. I just made a community post and kind of summarized some of my thoughts, which is what I'm going to do here. And I wasn't going to make a video, but then I got this comment saying that apparently a lot of people are already saying it's really busted because they're expecting a bunch of power creep. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. So we're going to go through this. This is my second attempt at this video. And we went through the whole survivor reveal and then went through the dev diary for Chef to get some additional context. And I basically yapped for 30 minutes saying the same shit over and over. So in the interest of your time, we're just going to go through it once, just this video, and I'm going to try and keep it down to like 5 minutes. So let's just get started. Okay, so first, the cleavers. There was a bit of speculation on the post, and I wasn't sure how they worked at first, but the dev diary elaborates a bit further. The cleavers, you can call back early or let them travel their full distance. They show that in action in the dev diary. This is really nice because, especially in the original Risk of Rain, if you had enemies get close on you, your cleaver would hit them once, go all the way past, and then just hang out for a bit, and then come back and hit them. And that downtime kind of sucked, especially if you got a bunch of people on you at once. So that's really nice that you can quickly call them back. They show them, like, popping back a bit quicker, better in the dev diary. This is a huge change to Glaze. So one of the major changes is that they have separated Roll and Glaze. In the original Risk of Rain, Roll and Glaze were the same skill. Glaze let you move around a little bit faster and would also oil up enemies you passed through. Pause. Now it just fires in front of you. We'll touch on this a bit more later, but it basically makes it so that you don't have to pass through enemies. I'm just going to go over what some of the changes are, and then I'm going to explain why they're all really good, but not really overpowered. As you see now, Seer is a short-ranged flamethrower. Seer used to be just a single shot of piercing fire. And you could empower it with what they're now calling Yes Chef. We're going to get into that. You could empower it, and it would be blue, it would be longer, and it would hit harder. First, I was unsure if that was a skill or a passive or what it was. That is a passive. Chef's Kiss, if you hit enemies with multiple skills before killing them, if you like combo your skills into each other, they drop a healing snack for you. And this is the other half of Roll. Right there was the other half of what used to be Glaze. There are charge levels. I presume that as you charge it, you get more damage and a longer stun, because it does stun enemies. This here, Yes Chef, is what used to be the special. Now it's an alternate special. So instead of, can't remember, did they say Glaze was going to be the special now? I think Glaze was the special. So yeah, you have Cleaver, Seer, Roll, and Glaze. And so you swap out Glaze for Yes Chef, and that empowers your next ability. It can either do this big blast of cleavers, and you see it does also, it's kind of hard to notice, but it does fire behind you. So you have cleavers going in all directions, not just in front of you. And it changes Seer to shoot multiple blue orbs. I imagine those have a blast radius. And then because you no longer have Glaze, Roll now not only does more damage just sitting spinning your cleavers around, but you can see Glaze is also attached. Like, you are now oiling enemies. So we can see normal Lemurian, oiled up Lemurian, and stunned. Does it show the status above? No, they don't have that spot. I was hoping it would show the oil. Oh, it does. It does right there. Or no, I don't think that's the oil symbol. I'm sure. Might be. Might have been an older version of the oil symbol because it's different in the dev diary. Maybe you're not even able to. I'm still a little unsure of whether you can oil in an empowered role. But we'll get to why that doesn't really matter later. So these are really good changes. He has a passive that heals him now. So he has built-in sustain. He has mobility that isn't tied to a crucial combo, because in the original Risk of Rain, a really good way to deal with crowds, you could kite enemies together, you could glaze through them, then turn around and sear, and it would stun, because if you seared a glazed enemy, it added on a stun and did bonus damage. So it was a really good way of hitting crowds really hard, but of course it was really dangerous, because going face first through an entire crowd is how you die in Risk of Rain. Even Multi has to be careful with that, and Multi has a stun, which kind of makes it harder for enemies to retaliate as you pass through them. Separating them into two separate skills was possibly the best thing they could have done, because now you have Glaze, which you can combo with Seer without having to pass through enemies, and you can have Roll just acting as its own mobility tool, and now that Roll has a stun, you can move through enemies without having to worry too much. You can use it in the same way Multi uses his charge, in being able to hit and interrupt something like a Stone Golem charging a laser at you. So that's a really handy utility to have. But these aren't so much, I don't think these are so much overpowered as they are the necessary changes that needed to happen to let Chef succeed in a 3D environment. So on a 2D plane, right, you're the center point, you have the left half of the screen and the right half of the screen. There's a limited number of options for where enemies can approach you from. It is fairly easy to group up a bunch of enemies on like the left or right half of the screen, pass through them all, and hit them with a single burst of fire. It is not as easy to do that. We'll take Seer, for example. If Seer was just a single line of fire, one shot. If I have an enemy in front of me, to the left of me, to the right of me, and up and like 45 degrees up. Maybe if let's say I do it in such a way that I can do a circle and glaze through all of them, and then I'm back at my starting point. Maybe I can line up, if it's a wide line, or if it's like a cone, maybe that Seer bolt, that shot, can hit the enemy in front of me and the one above me. But I've got two other glazed enemies that I can't hit with that, because it's one tick of damage. It's one instance, one projectile. Whereas now that it's a flamethrower, I can fire it at multiple enemies. Or if I do just want single target damage, I can torch one dude for the full duration. And in the dev diary, they show it applies a lot of stacks. It is very powerful. It's also much shorter ranged than the original. And that is, I think that's a very good trade-off. Make it stronger, but make it a little harder and more dangerous to use because you have to get in closer. Which is a range that Chef usually doesn't. Chef prefers, generally, when I play him, feels as though he prefers a mid-range. He's very versatile, but he likes to be in a mid-range. And even when he like has to pass through people, he does, like, if you do the Glaze Seer combo, you pass through them, you turn around, they're in close range, but then it knocks back and stuns them, which lets you get back out into your more comfortable mid-range, where your cleavers will do their double hit quickly without a lot of downtime in the travel in the air. This allows him to be a bit more versatile, be a bit closer range and a bit more mid-range. The change to Cleavers allows him to be a little bit more comfortable in that close range. Because again, if you're right in front of me, I hit you, and now I've got to wait forever for that Cleaver to come back. But I also have one of your buddies behind me and another dude over there, and y'all are jumping me. Suddenly, that is a much worse situation, sitting there waiting for my Cleaver to come back. Very bad time. So having them be able to come back faster, with the combination of using my flamethrower to be able to sweep targets, and then most importantly, Glaze being able to fire in front of me, and Roll being able to act just as a mobility tool. Like if I need to use Roll to reposition, I can just use Roll to reposition without worrying about the fact that my way to oil up enemies just went on cooldown at the same time. Because that was the thing that really sucked, is if I wanted to use it as a mobility tool, that meant one of my damage tools and like one of my setup tools is now also on cooldown. Now that they're separate, they can do their own thing, which is really nice. But Glaze firing in front of you also fixes, again, that risk factor of trying to go through enemies. That is a dangerous thing to do. You die doing that. That's why in Risk of Rain Returns, once the alternate skill came out that let you throw the oil bottle to hit enemies in front of you, a lot of people loved that because it was just a safer way of engaging enemies in a game that is very brutal when it punishes you very hard for trying to pass through enemies. Because in Risk of Rain Returns, there was not a stun on Glaze. It worked the same way it does in the original game. So there wasn't a stun. You would just get hit. You would go to pass through enemies, and then a electrified elite enemy would tase you just for being near him, and you die instantly. Now, granted, you shouldn't be going in at that low of a health, but they do a lot of damage at later levels, so it got a little difficult to avoid. This solves all of those problems, and it's not that that's going to make him insanely overpowered, but those are the sort of quality of life and skill adjustments that are needed to allow a character whose kit was made for a game that takes place on a two-dimensional plane to be able to succeed when you add that third dimension. If we just took, and we have an example of this, there is the Chef mod for Risk of Rain 2 that just pulls Chef as is from Risk of Rain into 2. And it's not bad, but it's also not great. It's really not. The immediate awkwardness shows whenever you try to use Glaze on flying units, because you just can't half the time. A bunch of flying units sit at a range where you can't jump up and then use Glaze to try and reach them unless you have a bunch of Hobo Feathers already. And especially in Risk of Rain 2, a bunch of the enemies, especially some of the like pain in the ass enemies, a bunch of them are in the air. There are a bunch of really annoying enemies that are in the air that you'd want to be able to use that combo on. Now, I talked before, I'd mention why losing Glaze for Yes Chef and therefore losing the Glaze Seer combo doesn't really matter. And that's because I suspect with the quality of life of shooting, not just being a single instance of fire, I suspect that the damage loss will be mitigated by the empowering of Yes Chef. I suspect that those fireballs have AoE. And I definitely don't think they're going to be so much weaker without the combo that they just won't be good. And again, Seer already does great damage on its own. It doesn't have to have oil to be successful. It does really good damage on its own. It just combos nicely if you want to take advantage of his passive. But you can do that without, if you have just Yes Chef, the empowered version of the fireballs, from what I can gather, we don't have numbers yet, which is another thing. We don't have numbers, so we can't really say, he's going to be really overpowered. We don't know that yet. Another thing that's really helpful, just in general, is that Cleavers will proc on the return hit, and if I remember what the dev diary said, they have twice the chance to proc if they land the return hit, which is a nice reward, kind of risk reward, because, again, in Risk of Rain Original 2D plane, you had like 10, 20 enemies clumped up on one side of the screen. This is why in Returns, once it hits the first enemy, it can no longer proc. You'll get yellow numbers from that on. When I made my chef guide, I was just wrong. I said that you could, and it was just I was incorrect. The cyber psychosis kicked in or something. But once you hit that first enemy, all the other ones it can't proc. because you're gonna be hitting tons of enemies every time you throw a cleaver into. But in returns, again, you have that third dimension. Enemies are going to be all over the place, and enemies sometimes strafe in weird ways, so it's going to be inconsistent getting that return hit, which is going to mean a damage loss, which means giving you this is a really good way to kind of help compensate for that and give you a benefit if you do manage to get the return hit, and help him make him just generally more effective against bosses. So I think all of those are, like, the fact that he can move separate of one of his setup skills, the fact that losing the setup skill won't nerf another skill by proxy because the skill you get by replacement also makes that skill stronger, and that skill is just really good on its own now because it's a continuous beam. It works really well in the 3D plane. All of these changes seem to be things that help Chef to exist in a three-dimensional game so that he's limited by the limitations you expect of his kit. He has normal, like, trade-off for a character, railgunner, for example, or sniper, or well, in either game, they have the advantage of very, very high single target damage and safety of range. But they struggle with when enemies get up close, sometimes, and they aren't really good at hitting crowds, generally. You get the right items, and you just turn Railgunner's thing into a machine gun that procs a shit ton of on hits. But that's its own. Items can change everything, of course. So there is a risk of return. Oh my god, I'm all over my words. There is a risk reward built into how the kit functions. If we just took Chef's kit from one and brought it over, the limitations Chef would face wouldn't be the natural limitations of the kit. It would be the limitations of a character who was made for a 2D game getting dragged into a 3D game. They've made the tweaks necessary to allow Chef to succeed in a 3D game. Now, do I think Chef is going to be just, like, normal, like, kind of Do I think he's going to be bad? No, I think he's going to be very good. I think he's going to be a very solid A tier. But do I think he's going to be a SS plus, like, OP out the gate, incredibly strong character? Unless the numbers, which we don't have yet, like, unless he has an insane base damage on everything, like a really good, like, insane proc coefficient that doesn't really take into account that he gets double proc chance or anything like that. If, like, if the base values are really, really broken in a way that just doesn't make sense for them to be, then sure. But barring something that I do not have the numbers and literally cannot make a judgment on at this time, no, I don't think so. Because we don't know any of the numbers. In the dev diary, they show well before the effect is even over, they show an enemy dropping to half health and having 10 fire stacks on him from Seer. That could have been on Drizzle difficulty. It didn't. I don't think there were items, but it very well could have been on Drizzle. We don't know what difficulty that was at. We don't know what the numbers are. We don't know what stage of the game that could have been, like, testing footage. We don't know if that's going to be exactly how it plays on release. I assume it's got to be close, but we don't know for certain. So we do not have the information to say for certain, yes, this is going to be overpowered, or yes, this is going to suck. I don't think it's going to suck. It's going to be solid. Chef's going to be good. I think they did exactly the changes we needed to see to let Chef succeed in the three-dimensional game that Risk of Rain 2 is. That's basically it. That's just my thoughts on it. Have a good one.